Way to kick off the first ad podcast of the week with Preeti Nadgar, who is a prominent media and communications strategy executive in the advertising industry. Out of mid-2025, she serves as Chief Strategy Officer for the U.S. offices of Starcom, a Publicis Media agency, marking her third tenure within the company. She first joined in 2004, returning in 2012, rising to the vice president level, and rejoined after some time away at other agencies. Prior to this, she was the chief strategy officer of EssenceMediacom, a GroupM agency, where she was recognized for her nearly 20 years of experience in creating creative and media agency leadership. She's described as a comms planning OG, original gangster, with a focus on data-centric strategy, human behavior research, building brave brands, nurturing diverse teams, and driving breakthrough creativity, connectivity, and culture in the evolving new comms economy. A proud first-generation Indian American, Preeti is based in the greater Chicago area. She's a mentor, especially to DESI, Asian professionals, a special needs mom, a dog rescuer, and an advocate for hybrid virtual work, and a fan of Bollywood dance music. She holds recent credentials in practicing neuromarketing research from Johns Hopkins University as of 2025, and has been featured in outlets like SiriusXM Media's Pass the Mic podcast, Adweek podcast, MediaPost, and the Advertising Club of New York as the resident Rockstar. Preeti, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your thoughts with us. And first thing on a Monday morning, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Namaste. It's lovely when you talk about me like that. I feel at once old and young at the same time. I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel really old. I've spent like 20, 25 years in this business, but I also feel like this business keeps you young because you're always learning and evolving. So thank you for the opportunity, Dylan.
Of course. So look, I know I gave a little bit of a rapid fire through your bio, but let's maybe bring it back and give folks some context. So tell me about where you grew up. What did you study? And then how did you get into the advertising and media industry?
I grew up in India. I am a military brat. And so I traveled all over India while I was studying. So I would say that perhaps Pune is my hometown, which is a really lovely town, 2.5, 3 hours from Mumbai. It used to be a cantonment town at one point in time, but I feel like I still bring that sort of small town thinking to many things I do, even though I've been so lucky to work in cities like Chicago and New York. What did I study? This might surprise you. I studied botany.
No way. That's so cool.
A botanist who decided that she was going to do something else with her life. When I discovered advertising, I had an internship at Ogilvy. I was a planner. And from there on, I was very clear that is what I was going to do with my life, was to study advertising and then work in that. I went to a school called MICA in India, which is at that point in time, I think I was batch number 3 or 4, but it's a very well-renowned institution of marketing and advertising in my part of the world. And when you actually look around across people in Asia, and you'll see a lot of CEOs, CSOs, etc., coming from that school. So I was very lucky to find that. And then I decided to come here, and I went to Syracuse University to study advertising. It was a master's program that I did there. When I finished, I looked around. Remember, I had studied botany, and I had like all these, I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew I had studied advertising, but I didn't really have much work experience. I looked around at all of the CEOs of all the agencies. I hadn't worked in, pure media before. And what I found was Renata McCann, who was the CEO of Starcom at that point in time. And I, with all the hubris of youth, wrote to Renata an email telling her why she inspired me and why she should hire me. And I thought, oh my goodness, she's never going to write to me. Why would she write to me? Like Renata, like that's Renata, and where I am. And it speaks volumes to the person that she is, that she wrote back to me and she said, HR will be in touch. And I was interviewed, and I took a job on as comms planner on the Procter & Gamble business at Starcom. So in 2004, I started my career. But this is why I also call myself the comms planning OG, because at that point in time, Starcom was building comms planning from the ground up in the US. So it was, there were many attempts around the country, but one of them was ours.
So cool. Well, I have so many questions, but so you did at least get to kick off your agency career in India. Can you tell me what are the biggest differences in your mind between the Indian market, kind of the APAC market, and the North American market or the global markets that you've worked in?
Yeah, so I mean, I can definitely speak to when I worked there, but the wonderful advantage I've had is before I took on US CSO roles at WPP or here, I had the opportunity to be in global businesses. So I was able to lead SC Johnson and also Google while I was working in a global capacity. So I'll speak to that regard. Our US market compared to other markets is a very, very fragmented media market in terms of where people consume advertising. The other thing that I would say to you, so in India, for example, TV is still a very, very big mechanism. Advertising is treated as entertainment often.
Interesting.
Meta, especially Facebook, delivers a lot of views and a lot of engagement as well in some of those markets. Some other markets, like perhaps Japan or China, you have particular social media that can actually give you a lion's share of some of your reach, etc. Here in the US, we are spending more time with media than any other country. And we choose to do it in two different ways. One, where we are getting unlimited access to the people we care about and the brands we care about. I would put Twitch in that. I would put YouTube in that same space. Or else we can also talk about spaces where we are beginning to put ourselves in what I like to call closed trampolines. Essentially having fun, but where nobody can see us, or being, subscription environments, ad avoidance environments, any of them. Yeah. So those are big differences, very fragmented. So the job here is much harder because you cannot start media back. You've got to start human back. And so, or human forward, let's say. And so that, I think, is the biggest sort of challenge we have in our market.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you almost think of the North American market when you think of like luxury, the fact that we can, just afford to be like, I don't want to watch ads, so I'll pay $5 extra per month, or I'll pay a subscription to install this ad blocker. Like, it's almost like a privilege to be able to avoid ads if you want to. Like for me, I do SVOD whenever I have premium content because I just don't want to be interrupted by advertising. Yeah. I don't mind ads. I just don't like them in the context of when I'm watching like a really cool show that I don't want to be interrupted. Now, if I'm on YouTube and I'm watching like a podcast, or I'm watching short form videos, or I'm watching TikToks or something like that, I don't mind seeing the ads because sometimes they're, like you said, they're entertaining and they're as relevant sometimes if it's done well and it's targeted well as the content that you're watching. There's certain environments that you want to skip those types of things. Do you think that's kind of a luxury? Is that a luxury market where, folks have the ability to just be like, I don't want to watch ads, so I'm going to pay a little bit extra?
We are definitely a much more privileged market. I wouldn't call us a luxury market. I think that there is a lot of pressure right now on discretionary income for many, many people. In fact, we find that streaming itself has become a hacking game. You are following content versus channels. And so we see a lot of activity moving around from one streaming medium to another, depending on where content is traveling. And month-to-month subscriptions are being either signed on to or canceled, depending on the mood, the environment, the water cooler talk, whatever it might be that week. The one place I think that we are able to, as advertisers, communicate is in live environments. So whether that may be in awards or sports, which is specifically, I think, is 90% of all of the spaces we are able to communicate.
That's crazy. Yeah, sports and appointment viewing, and especially as it pertains to, not only the big leagues and the big sports moments, but also just this proliferation of like tier 2 and tier 3 sports. Like if people want to watch dancing performances or jiu-jitsu or bull riding, they have those opportunities in those areas to engage.
I mean, what is Survivor is in its 40th season or something? And I feel like, how is that even happening in our world, right? But even how we watch, really depending on our age or our generation, that changes. So how my husband might watch sports is very different from what my 20-year-old son might watch sports. He might want to watch it in snippets. He might want to watch it on other platforms where he's receiving a commentary from experts about the statistics of that game or the reach of that game. And you often see younger generations not even paying attention to advertising and really being on second screens or third screens, if you will, all the time. And so that itself presents another challenge, is that, is live viewing really viewing, or is it just live passive viewing?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think second screen also gives an opportunity for authentication and validation of advertising? You think about the idea that if I can somehow through technology, through either beacons or IP addresses, say, okay, well, here's a TV over here, but then I can see 3 cell phones sitting on the couch, and maybe I can't actually see them, but I can kind of tell that they're in the same room. And if my cell phone hears an ad that plays on the TV, that's also a point of authentication. So, as much as second screen is a challenge, what do you think are the opportunities with second screen?
I think the opportunities are to think about it as a comms planner. This is like such a lovely world to be in, right? Because we think
Hmm.
about things in sequence. We think about things, you want to be able to introduce people to your brand or to your message, and we might call that discovery. And then the next phase is for people to be able to do what I call the double click. So from discovery to double click is happening in the same moment. You're able to sort of think about what that might look for, and that might be very, very different. Let's say it's a brand like, a QSR, a big QSR brand. That might look really different for you, Dylan. And because of your family and where you live, than it might for myself. And so
Mm.
that type of personalization that we are able to do, going from a mass audience environment where you and I might have watched the Bears, take on the Packers, and now we can go to the next level where we are able to talk about, the brand's world, the brand's environment, the brand's ecosystem, the brand's values, and based on what we might be interested in, we can take you down that journey. And this is where I think the Starcom is so lovely. Publicis is so amazing because of our connected identity and our addressable audiences. We're really, able to know what is relevant to this person. So I'm not serving you garbage that you'd like to avoid. Instead, I'm telling you a brand message that you'd like to engage with.
Yeah, I love that. I want to drill down on a conversation I recently had on personalization. Personalization for a long time was kind of the holy grail, right? It was like, okay, you're going to have 100 pieces of creative out there. They're all going to be micro targeting these audiences. And, me as a guy sitting in Southern California who likes surfing, that's the ad that I'm going to see. And, you're going to see an ad in Chicago based on people and characters that might look and feel like you and the things that you're interested in and the life stages that you are in. But I talked to a gal, her name is escaping me, which I hate, but the conversation I can remember, we were talking about the idea of advertising also being aspirational, that sometimes I actually engage more in ads that aren't talking to me on where I am right now, but it's talking to me on where I want to be. So for instance, financial services companies do a really good job at like showing me like what life might look like when I retire in 20 years. Or, college companies might advertise to me, to my daughters who are 10 and 12, but show me what they might look like when they turn 18, like what you're dealing with right now with, your kids going off to school. How important is personalization from the perspective of not just talking to people about where they are and who they are today, but who they want to become?
So I think that's really interesting. I always think about it from the brand's point of view in some ways, right? The conversations we have, this is such a teeter-totter seesaw situation. Um, Personalization is an important thing, as far as it's still being relevant and not feeling too big brother to people. And
Mm.
this is the fine space which brands have to walk today. You want to be able to talk to people, but you also want to be able to talk to people in the ways they want to be spoken to. And so this becomes, I think, that this sort of double-edged sword, if you will, is that we know too much about people. And we might know too much about people. Having said that, I would say to you, all advertising is aspirational. Even an ad you see for a lovely bowl of cereal with cold milk being poured in and some flakes falling in. You might not be somebody who eats cereal every day and perhaps chooses to eat avocado toast. But that thing looks pretty darn good. It looks pretty tasty. And so, at least in that space, if you were to think about, eating a bowl of cereal, it might be an engaging and interesting thing to take on. So, all advertising in general, I think, is tries to be at least aspirational, if not that, at least invitational, saying, come on in and try me, or come on in and I'll remind you about my world. And that was really exciting and interesting. I do think personalization is very, very important in today's world, where there is so much pressure on CMOs to show what is working and what isn't. And so, in the world of personalization, we are not now thinking of brand monies and performance monies. Instead, we are thinking about how they are sequenced. Where are we spending the monies? Are these audiences or these platforms warranted the amount that we are spending? And we are able to measure both in a fast twitch way and perhaps in a longer latency way what we are seeing in those spaces. So I think personalization has become really, really important to be able to measure performance, both for consumers in terms of like, does this make any sense for me? And look at the amount of impulse purchase buying that is happening on social platforms like Instagram or TikTok, or look at sort of the longer sequenced conversations we are having when we are trying to talk about insurance or cellular, etc., and the education that is happening. Again, with pharma brands, that's another space you can see that personalization is really important. You might be somebody who's suffering as a patient, but your caregiver is equally as important. Often we find that caregivers are even more important in being able to talk about medications, bringing discussion guides to doctors, etc. And so the ways that we can personalize and be able to understand signals, as far as we are being useful and relevant, I think we can only get better without being Big Brother.
I think that's a great point. You want to use that data in a way that doesn't feel creepy, but feels additive to the consumer's experience. All right.
Most brands we work with are very, very good about that. They're very good about asking for opt-ins. They're very good about asking for, permissions. And so we are huge proponents of that.
I love it. All right. I want to pivot to, something that I know that's important to you, which is mom life inside of agency culture. You boomerang back to Publicis a few times. So I think that speaks highly of the organization. And I know you even took some time off during your journey as well to stay home with your children. So tell us a little bit about, why do you think you've come back to Publicis? And also let's spend some time talking about, life as a working mom within the agency world and, the idea of taking time off to be with your family and then coming back later on down the road.
Yeah, I think this is a topic that's really dear to me because I fully recognize that many women don't have the privilege of being able to do that, and often, especially during COVID, we had a lot of moms who took time off to be with their children, or dads too who took that time off to be at home to be a primary parent, and then re-entry is really awful. It's hard, it's difficult. It's not, again, like they're coming back also into a world where our industry itself has shrunk so much. So I fully recognize my own privilege in that I had finished most of my education before I had my children. I had these wonderful relationships within Starcom. So I actually spent some time off with my kids, a few years with my children when they were very little. That is still my first job. My second job is to be CSO at Starcom. But when I was sort of done and I wanted to come back into the workforce, I wrote to somebody who's still my mentor, Lata Sundaram, and she used to be a Starcom at that point in time. And she introduced me to Kathy Klein, who then took me on to come back to work here. So this is my third time boomeranging to Starcom.
Wow.
Starcom, I would say to you, I have found in all 3 times that I have worked here that this is a place that doesn't contain you in little boxes. It allows you to expand yourself, and it invites you to expand Starcom with it. And my most recent boomerang back is because of that reason. I mean, the most interesting thing that I find, and Shelby and I kid about this, Shelby's our CEO at Starcom, is that even though I had not known her before, our daughters had actively actually battled at water polo in Texas
No way.
in the Olympic development team. So it was really exciting. That's how Shelby and I first met. And of course, I knew of Shelby, and she kids many times that my daughter, who was much bigger than Savvy, much older as well as Savvy, almost drowned Savvy, and she looked at me, and I was like, "I'm sorry." I'm mouthing I'm sorry from the other team. So anyway, I mean, I would just say to you, it's really lovely to be at a place where in our C-suite, there are 7 people. Of the 5 women, all of us are people who've had, enjoyed lovely families, have children of all kinds of ages. And this is quite a rarity in many places in advertising. Still very, very hard for people to be able to balance both. There are many women who I have seen both during COVID and after, who were at very, very senior posts, who were tremendously contributing to the intellectual capacity of our industry, who had to step back for multiple reasons, or either just for their the physical safety of their family, the psychological safety of their family, the mental health of themselves. Any of those reasons are excellent reasons to be able to either step back or step back into work. But I've seen that it's a rarity.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, it's interesting. My wife was at Omnicom. She was kind of like the main person in our family that had the bigger career. And then when we started having kids, she, very generously retired to raise our kids when they were little. And now she does still helps me with my little agency, but she also, teaches yoga and does other things that she really enjoys that scratch that creative itch. So I think it's awesome to see that Starcom has built this culture where it's so supportive of moms, both taking time off, being a working mom, and staying with continuity in the agency. And I think it's obviously a vote of confidence, the fact that you've come back 3 different times throughout your career. I also wanted to note that you've been an advocate for hybrid and virtual work. I'm curious on what your current, where are you guys as Starcom as a whole? And do you like kind of where things are now? Like, do you think it's the right mix? Like, what is your kind of POV on the whole, virtual and remote, and, the return to office kind of tension that we're seeing play out across both agency land, but also corporate America at large?
I would say to you, the tension is real. I feel it amongst different generations. I personally am always going to push for as much time as you can in person. Creativity and collaboration comes from in person. I also feel learning comes in person. And I don't mean it in this way of a hierarchy where someone's going to learn from me. I have much less to teach people, I think, than people have to teach me. And so let's say we are working on something in a pitch environment. I want to be amongst people who are actually using the tools of our trade, who are actually battling through what assumptions and mechanisms they are using to make some, to make some leaps of what they might then build for a client. And those conversations between ourselves are really, really important for both my growth and their growth. And I do feel, especially in strategy, there are times when we want to go away and we want to be able to do our writing work by ourselves. This is really important for people who write for a living, and some of us do. And that is really important. But also the time back at work is super important, because we are now stewards of the entire media plan. I can only speak to Starcom, but we're stewards of the entire media plan. And we're only touching sometimes only 10% of the media plan when we are writing our work. Over time, though, that is now developing into a full experience plan, into an execution, into ideas. If we as strategists or we as marketers are not sitting next to the person who's building that plan, then that plan is not coming up, fruit to our strategy. So I would say, to me, it's really important that we are balancing both of those things. Yeah, but I do fully recognize that, in environments where we're sitting in open desk environments and people are overstimulated, or we have introverts in our environment. So our offices are very well developed to be able to make, space for those kinds of people. But I think that we have to start becoming much more actively thinking about that, especially as leaders. When our entire workforce is sort of shifting from what might have been extrovert oriented service folks only, to within media, we have a lot of coders and engineers and product managers and project managers. And so to be able to identify what separate skill sets look like and how to bring that in.
Yeah, I love that. The writer dynamic reminds me of my early career in Hollywood, where, in TV shows, you have the writer's room, which are all the executive producers and writers, and they come in as a team every single day and they bang out story ideas and they collaborate. And then when they figure out kind of the basic framework of an episode, they say, okay, Bob, now you go and write episode 1. And then they do the same thing. And then they say, Shelley, you go write episode 2. And then there's also the idea that once they, kind of get through the writing, then they're saying, now, Bob, you go direct and produce episode 1, and you go direct and produce episode 2. So it's this kind of brain where the creativity is going in both, like the IP and then the execution are being kind of like put out to, do their things, but always in a collaborative environment. But yeah, the writing situation is a very personal experience. Like when you need to turn in pages on a script or turn in a brief or something like that, and you're under a deadline, you need some peace and quiet sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, and I tend to think of it in two ways. It's inside out and outside in, right? So there's a lot of outside in that's going to happen, which is collaboration. So you want to be around people, you want to be able to understand what the brief is, you want to be around clients, you want to be able to understand how they speak about the problems that they are worried about, concerned about. But then you want to go away and have your time when you are basically sort of pushing from inside yourself all of the pattern finding you're doing. And now there's a third rail, which is AI, which is a Copilot or Marcel, as we like to call it here at Publicis, being able to help us in various environments, sometimes, sort of being a sparring partner, sometimes helping us write, sometimes teaching us what not to write, and then sort of helping us summarize things, move faster. And so I think it becomes even harder. It was much simpler in the world before AI, when COVID or the pandemic or things, we were just thinking about Zoom and hybrid. I think that the environment, even sitting in the office now, can often be where people might, sort of be working with AI while they're working also with other human beings around them.
I love that. All right, let's spend a little bit of time with neuromarketing, because I visited a few neuromarketing labs over the years, and I find it fascinating. We think we're such complex machines, these human brains, and we think that we make choices on the things that we buy and the products that we love and the things that we watch. We really think that we have agency, but the reality is that subliminal programming is sometimes, I think I've read a statistic that 92% of purchases are still made based on instinct. And like you were talking about earlier today, impulse, so instinct or impulse. The way that we frame our association and attachments to brands are many times instinctive and based on stories that we tell ourselves from very young ages. For instance, I drive Cadillacs because my grandfather drove a Cadillac when he became successful, and that's what our family does, right? So I'd be curious, what are some of the things that you're seeing in neuromarketing and the work that you're doing? What are some of the exciting developments that you think are interesting that we could share with the audience?
I would say I am far from a neuromarketer. I am somebody who just studied 3 online courses through Johns Hopkins and enjoyed them tremendously. This was my best use of my gardening leave. But I just wanted to be able to learn for myself what these environments mean and what that says. Having said that, I can sort of try to be an armchair neuromarketer,
Sure.
if there's such a term. And sort of talk about, like, there is system thinking, there is social thinking, and then there is story thinking. And I think those are pretty
Mm,
much the 3 S's. Of course, I'm a strategist. I'll try to put everything in a 3 framework. And so system thinking, for sure, just what you described. Instinct. System 1, we're able to really quickly access things. We are inundated with messages. We are inundated with brands. We are inundated with stimuli overall. Anybody who is a parent to more than one child, or even has a dog, or more than one dog, will tell you, like, everybody wants your attention all at once. And so this is a fairly important space when you understand through neuromarketing that there is only so much attention resource that human beings have, because about 95% of our brains are doing other things. There's only about 5% of our brain that actually can have attention. And so even though my kids laugh at me, I do have to turn the volume down if I'm trying to find, the right parking spot in some space, because there's only so much attention resource I can put to the lyrics of this music, even though that might be wrote in my head. So systems, for sure. Those are really important. The second thing I would say is social. So whatever social environments we find ourselves in, I think the most important thing we can learn about human beings is that they are social animals. This exactly goes back to our conversation about hybrid and RTO or any of these other spaces. We are meant to be social. No one will ever convince me otherwise. Every single instinct in us programs us to be better at something, to be able to be more socially acceptable. This is just how we lived. Women especially are conditioned, and neuromarketing has lots and lots of studies and data to show you this, that the reason we are able to navigate within complex matrixed organizations as human beings, and particularly even women, is because we are able to bring in these cues of EQ and IQ at the same time, and that makes us, uniquely human. But we do that all the time. Even if we're buying a phone, is an iPhone really better than an Android phone? One could argue no. But most Americans tend to think about an iPhone as some sort of a badge of a tribe. Whether that's a better or
mm.
a worse badge, we can decide later as well. Similarly, many engineers or open network folks, I worked on Samsung for a little bit, and I had learned there that Android was their particular expression of freedom. It wasn't really even just a phone. And so when you think about environments like that, I think that you will notice that it's always social, no matter who you are. And then I would say stories. And that's, I think, the biggest part is our own histories, our own cultures, the way we are able to pattern memories and things, and, why we might pick one brand over the other, why we might pick one car over the other, why you today, chose these headphones versus the tiny ones that go in our ears. They each are saying something about ourselves, our lived experiences, our experiences of the world, recommendation engines, what our friends do. Again, like, let's go back to all of it. But I would say to you, the simplest thing in neuromarketing is that people are really complex, and they're really, really wonderful to continue to explore. I mean, I've spent 20 years doing it, and they always tend to surprise me. Always.
Well, for someone who's only taken 3 classes on neuromarketing, you've explained it a lot better than I've seen a lot of people who've spent entire careers thinking about it. But it's probably because they're such quantified, science-based, thinking, and you're very good at taking complex things and boiling them down to things that people can understand, which is what I
Oh
think
my
great.
gosh, Dylan, that's so kind of you. Thank you for saying that.
Of course.
I try hard. There was
Well,
a
that's
very wise woman named Kathy Klein who once told me not to use big words.
well, I think it's the badge of a great comms person as well. So you've also talked about this idea of hacking platforms and having a hacker mentality as a media planner. When you think about hacking, you oftentimes think of this idea of kind of like IT and cybersecurity and coders. But you've mentioned that, now the modern media agency doesn't just have media buyers, planners, strategists, et cetera, they do have people that go down to, folks that know how to use very complex self-serve and co-self-serve / managed service platforms that are very complicated and have lots of features and a lot of capabilities, down to actually having coders within your organization writing software and creating tools, whether it's Marcel and other internal tooling. So how important is it to have that kind of hacker mentality in the media world? The idea of pushing platforms to their limits and experimentation, and even down to the level of where you're, not being a bad hacker, but you're really, you're trying to find efficiencies and you're trying to game systems when you can, if that means getting your clients, a better return on investment on their ad spend. Be curious about that idea of the hacker mentality.
Yeah, I think, if you boil a hacker down to its simplest explanation, if we were not only thinking about it in terms of technology, we might be thinking about somebody who is able to look at a pattern, look at in a large scale, look at an environment, and then be able to tell a portal through which we are able to communicate or engage or create an outcome. And so I think this is the most delicious and exciting and juicy part of being in media. Like, I choose to be in media on purpose. I did try my hand at a creative agency. I loved it. They are awesome. But at the same time, this is where I belong, because we can change altitudes. We can change scale. We can change, the sizes of the platforms that we engage with. And within that, the simplicity of being able to communicate with an individual. These are, I think, really, really interesting things. And unless you know these systems, unless you know the ways that someone is able to take what I might say is one person, Preeti, over here within, a larger connected identity space, and be able to think about that as an addressable audience within a platform, that connection is what is so interesting and creative and hacky. But also, how do we be able to speak to them? I mean, people aren't giving us attention. This is the fight for attention, is actually advertising now, isn't it? And so if that is the fight for attention, how do you break out of what you might call clutter, or what you might call the boring or the banal or the beige, whatever we might want to call it? But the curse right now is beige advertising. And so unless you have a hacker mentality on how do you actually create for people, create for clients, create for businesses, something that feels interesting, that feels differentiated, I think that you just won't be able to catch attention in this world.
Yeah, I love that. We spoke a little bit in our pre-interview about the importance of Gen Alpha and how you guys are thinking of them. I have a 10 and 12-year-old girl, but I'll spend a little bit of time talking about my 12-year-old. She's on social media. She figured out a way a couple weeks ago to work with an engagement group on Instagram that got her kind of an initial groundswell of followers, and she's reached over 500,000 people this month on her Instagram account.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, totally. And technically, she's not even supposed to be on Instagram if we got it down to the rules.
Well, we won't tell. We'll just broadcast it on a different platform.
Exactly. But the other components that you think about are the idea that, like my wife oftentimes will put on her outfit and then go and ask my daughter if it's, something that she should walk outside in. We're going to go on a vacation after we go to Cannes this year, and my daughter is lobbying for a cruise in the Greek islands. We bought a Tesla because my daughter thought it was cool. Gen Alpha is impacting 45% of major household purchases. How important is Gen Alpha, and how much time should marketers and brands be focused on making sure that they care about them just as much as their parents and their larger households?
Again, this is a double-edged sword. I'll talk about Gen Alpha a little bit, and then I'll talk about how marketers should think about them, or at least my thinking on it. Look, the worst thing you can think about Gen Alpha is that they are younger Gen Z. I have 2 Gen Zs in my household, and this is a whole new operating system. Gen Z is a much more magnanimous and generous cohort, if you will, in terms of being able to give of themselves. These children grew up really in social spaces. They are very comfortable with social spaces. They communicate in that way. They even, we talk social network, right? But there is a lovely piece of work, a podcast that studied young people and showed that the social network in Snap was allowing young people to think about who was friends with whom inside a high school, and to be able to
Wow.
figure out where the networks were, where the power was, where the relationships lived, who went where, and who liked whose post, could actually indicate to them in real time where the networks truly were forming. So it's really interesting. Having said that, Gen Alpha, if you don't earn attention instantly, you don't exist. So I think some of the things you already said. When I'm talking to my clients, I'm going to say, if your brand is not playable, then it's forgettable. That is how I think. By the way, I would say to you, that's a pretty good mantra for every single generation out there. Let people play with your brands. Now, it's harder, easier for me to say than for a brand to allow. It's very, very hard because to whom much is given, much is expected. Brands are very responsible about being able to communicate with Gen Alpha, which right now we can't at all, Dylan. So it's interesting that your children are so clear about the choices they want to make for mom and dad, who aren't parents. You guys are co-users of but at the same time, if you think about it, we aren't communicating with them. And you are trying everything in your power to be able to protect your girls from environments that we might be wanting to speak to them. And that is exactly right. Jonathan Haidt's book on the anxious generation is really important. There is a lot of conversation that is happening in various schools in various countries about what these environments bring to children and their mental health. But at the same time, brands are even more conscious of that. We get to work with some brands who have taught me so much about, actually, I would say, they might be asking for my expertise, but they actually have been studying young people, kids, over generations. And one of the things that stays true is that adults, including ourselves as marketers, need to be really careful about how we are communicating with these young people. And so parents are choosing more and more to put them inside walled gardens that are non-ad supported. So then in that world, brands have to work harder. Brands have to work harder to develop content that is both safe, that is invited, that is engaged with once and over and over. And so you see brands developing content or developing access through celebrities or influencers in the ways that young people might want to engage with them.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like one of the things, that me and my daughters kind of have three things we do together. We go camping with the YMCA with like a group of daughter dads who go camping once a month. We go snowboarding together, and then we also play video games together, mainly Fortnite. So like if a brand, wants to get in front of me and my kids, and like in the way that we, especially like dads and daughters, like to engage, like Fortnite is a media channel where, brands participate, and there's not ads, but there are brand integrations and skins and all these things that, my kids will pay money to engage with these brands because they have to buy, whatever it's called, like V-Bucks or whatever, to buy the skins or the things that are branded items essentially. So that's a great touch point, within that walled garden ecosystem that you recommended. And yeah, as a parent,
I'm gonna go back to the closed trampoline thing.
Sure,
I'm gonna
yep.
come back to it again because I feel like that's the important part, is to understand how this trampoline has been zipped. That Fortnite environment for you and your daughters is a very important place to play. Having said that, if a brand wants to enter that environment, it has to be in a very, very safe space, which you will invite us into the trampoline or not. And once you've invited us, we have great responsibility as both as advertisers, but also as marketers, to make sure that we are doing the thing that you invited us in for. Because you don't get to make even one mistake anymore. Brands have done things that were perhaps a little played with fire and then probably learned. was going to use
100%.
language that may not be appropriate for
Well, hey, we this is
FAFO, baby.
there's no censorship here, but we can keep it professional if you
My
like.
18-year-old daughter would disapprove if I was using tough language on this.
It's all
podcast.
good. It's all good. You've sometimes described yourself as a contagious strategic catalyst. What's a framework or a mindset shift that you think is associated with that idea of a contagious strategic catalyst? What does that mean to you?
I think I tend to think about it as somebody who has built a craft of consequential choices. So I tend to think about strategy overall as the craft of consequential choices. Now, let me explain what I mean and why I feel like that is a contagious thing. Is because my choices in any environment, in any organization like my own or others, is built by consequences that someone else is seeing in the system. A post-campaign analysis, for example, might be seen by someone who's looking at the analytics of a programmatic buy, or someone might be looking at an MTA or an MMM, which are measures of marketing and brand value that are being looked at by someone else. And so my only decision that I am making every day, and strategy is a decision, it's not really a discipline at all, is to be able to think about the choices I would make in an environment, in a campaign, in a brand, in a media plan, to be able to understand which audiences I want to go after, where is growth going to come from, what are some of the spaces adjacent to my brand where there might be growth that they might not be seeing if they are only looking at their own category, for example. What are the heuristics inside a store or inside a website when people are looking or walking away or abandoning engagements with the brand? And so all of those, if I can pick those up, look at them as choices and build a craft. And I always like to say the word craft because it to me says something that is both technical but is also handmade, but has been built over years of making mistakes and failing and losing and asking other people and being told no or being told yes, whatever that might be. But that craft of consequential choices is contagious in itself because it touches everything. It is very humble in that it is able to ask questions. It is curious because it's asking other people to help me make the decision, to be able to come up with the most educated decision, and then being able to present that in a curated way to someone, yourself, Dylan, or a client, or a business that we're talking to, my own team who I speak with. Again, like I think that is what I think is being contagious, or I don't know that I call myself a contagious strategic catalyst. If I did, that was too many big words.
Well, you love the little things that AI will find during a interview research. But I'll grab the citation.
Tell me where it appeared, and I will erase every memory of it. It is not written by me, I promise.
Oh, I love it. Well, Preeti, this has been a pleasure.
Likewise, my friend.
Yeah, I've really appreciated getting to know you a little bit through the pre-call process, and I look forward to staying in touch and following along and following your work. If folks want to connect with you and or learn more about what you're doing at the agency these days, where would you like to send folks?
I would love to see them on LinkedIn, but I am Preeti.Nadgar at starcom.ww.com.
I love it. And for those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you are listening to the show and you want to give us an honest review on whatever platform you happen to be listening, that's how we find a larger audience organically. And if there is a brand marketer out there or somebody in the media agency world who you think would be inspired by Preeti's amazing career, or maybe there is a mom or an aspirational mom out there somewhere in media or advertising world who wants to see an example of someone who has done both and got to have it all, so to speak, and have an amazing career and an amazing family, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Preeti, I will wish you a great week and look forward to seeing you out in the wild.